Southeast Wisconsin astro-imaging group has a program tonight with a guest speaker. The speaker is from Tucson. I virtually met him as a member of the Tucson Astronomy Club. Saw his images, which are fantastic, and found out that he was doing some seminars, YouTube videos on different topics, and I thought the one that he's going to discuss with us tonight would be of interest to this group and our broader group. So tonight we've invited the Madison, Milwaukee astronomy clubs, as well as the San Simon Valley group. Now, we're not a club down here in Rodeo, New Mexico and Portal, Arizona, but we do have a large number of astronomers. Most of them told me on Tuesday that they would be taking their spouses out for Valentine's Day and would watch the video. So we know that we picked a date, and we assume everyone here just doesn't care about their loved one, and that's why they're here with us tonight.
Unless you're in love with your telescope.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's.
I have it right here with me.
Yeah.
So, Alex, I'll turn the program over to you, and we look forward to being sacrificed at your altar of luminance.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. And this is going to be very informal, so anytime you have a question or objection or anything else, feel free to jump in. So that's my somewhat sarcastic opening. As you can probably tell from it, I'm not a big fan of L subframes, and I'll try to explain why over the course of this talk. First, I'm going to revise technology a bit, and it's because we use the word detail for our images, and detail, in fact, can mean a lot of things. It not only, at least a couple of things. It not only means, of course, differences in brightness from one area to another, which can render detail, but also changes in color and, in fact, changes in tint, tone, and all those other words used to describe color can also provide detail in our image. I'm going to only be talking about the changes in brightness over the images, and I'm going to refer to that in all these slides as fine scale structures and just abbreviated FSS. So that's what you'll see. If you prefer the word detail, that's fine. I'll probably slip back into using that quite a few times during the talk. So there, a long time ago, I've gone back to the oldest astro processing book I have, which was back in the previous century. I think around 1991 or something like that. And it has a quote that's somewhere similar to this, but this one I got, in fact, off Cloudy Nights, and it says the RGB provides the color and the L provides the detail. That's a very, and it's not given with any justification, and it's not given with any apologies. So it's, everybody chimed in after the person said something like this, and then they all provided their version of it. But it seemed to be a unanimous opinion among that particular talk group, or whatever that is, that this was a truism. But if it were true, then the SHO images we make, for instance, would have no detail, and they clearly do. Our RGB images, some of us just use RGB and not the L, and they would also lack detail, and they don't. And of course, landscape photographers who never take an L image would be up a creek with blank images coming out of their cameras. So obviously that statement is true, is not true. And if it's untrue, then we have to ask the question, why do we start down that road of taking luminous subframes? And actually, what part does it play in our astro images, if any? Reliance on L apparently arose from a interpretation of statistics. At least that last statement that L was for detail arises from this. The fine scale structures seen in an image are those structures that are visible to us above the noise level of the image. Sometimes they're buried in the noise level of the image and we can't see them. And one of these images has two components in it that play off against each other. It's signal and noise. Anything that suppresses the noise raises the signal to noise ratio, which makes the signal stand out in the image. So suppressing noise is what it's all about. And adding luminance subs to RGB, if done correctly, reduces luminance noise, hence making the signal or the fine scale detail more apparent. But nowadays, particularly, adding L is not the best way to go. There are other ways to improve signal and noise. Some of them we have control over, and surprisingly enough, one that benefits us greatly does not. We do not necessarily have control over. So before we start taking lots of images, either RGB images or lots of luminance images, it behooves us to find out something about our system, do some background research, and see how our system reacts to taking 10 each RGB, 20 each RGB, 30 each RGB. Now I'm finding on AstroBin, a lot of people are coming up with 300 hours of images from a group taking pictures simultaneously. And the question would arise is, what do you get from 300 hours? And one person said in that one of those groups that as far as he can see, it was no gain over the images he had by himself. The 5 other people's contributions did nothing. So that's one point of view, but you'd have to find that out for yourself with your own equipment and your own seeing conditions, etc. Okay, some factors that limit our visibility of these fine scale structures is insufficient exposure time. I put in parentheses here some little, I'm not sure, explanatory notes of some kind. So this 2 things we can do. Total exposure time is one thing, but we can also ask questions of how that total exposure time should be divided among some subframes. Is it better to have, I'm not going to do this arithmetically correct, but is it better to have 100 minutes of 10-second frames or 100 minutes of 2-hour frames, for instance? That's something else you have to think about a bit and then test out your equipment on those 2 possibilities. There's low optical resolution that affects the presence or viewing of fine scale structure. It's actually kind of a blurring. It's not really noise. And so it's a limiting factor, and it could be the dominant limiting factor. And maybe noise isn't important to your image at all. It's your sky conditions that are, or your optics or your sky conditions, which I'll get to in just a minute, that are limiting your fine scale structure. Noise in the camera, that's the main focus for today, or one of them. And so we'll talk about that. Like I just jumped ahead and said, the steadiness, clarity, scattering and brightness of the night sky you're operating beneath also has large control over what your limiting conditions are. It tends to blur the image more than increase the noise. And techniques for removing noise don't remove blur. The target brightness, that's a noise limiter. If it's way down there deep, you need more exposures anyway. And again, something you have to determine for your layout. But there are others too, and one of them is that the displays that we look at our pictures on the monitors and the printers and the internet all have limitations of what they can provide us. we have pixel resolution in our displays. We have the fact that virtually everything wants to use now sRGB for our displays, and certainly the internet requires it or translates everything we have into sRGB, sometimes not very well. So any images you post, you should put into sRGB and look at before you put them up there. If you use something like Adobe RGB, you may be not getting the renderings you expected when you put them on the internet. Then there's also our brains and our eyes, and that's not a noise issue either. That's how we perceive colors and details. And some people, everybody's eyes are different. And from what I've been reading, and I've read a lot, color specialists believe that no two people see colors exactly the same. And of course, we know that some people have color blindness, others have retinas that are detaching, and all these things can affect what we see or can see in our images, even if there is lots of detail. And then finally, and of as much importance as any of the above, is the ability of the image processor to actually bring out the detail that is in those images. A lot of people, when they first get into image processing, yours truly included, expect to make images that are made by the best of the image processors in maybe a week or two. It's not a week or two, it's a long and arduous path. And if it weren't, I don't think the hobby would be as interesting as it is. So any of the above can control, be the controlling factor for what we can see in the images we produce. But something is doing it in every image we produce. So I'm going to just briefly, and very briefly, there's a lot of writing on these next two slides, and it's really more just to have it documented than for me to go through each one. But let's look at a few of them. As I said about the exposures and number of images, that's a trial and error thing. You have to figure out what's best for your system. There are equipment limitations. We all know about things like Dawes limit and the Nyquist rule and all that kind of stuff. But Dawes limit is talking, and Nyquist for that matter, are talking about resolving two bright dots on a black background from one another. And that's not the same as all our detail in our images. In our images, we may have a thin black line running across the face of a bright nebula. And we want to resolve that. Well, that's not the same issue as resolving two stars that are close together. I don't know, I haven't found anyone who has addressed that kind of issue in assessing the capabilities of your equipment. But I think from looking at the images I process with the greatest ability I have, that I think I can resolve things down to, on a really good set of images, ones taken by a big telescope in a very quiet sky place, very dark. I think I can get down to about, yeah, I can get a little bit under an arc-second kind of resolution in the image itself, not some calculated resolution, but the image actually contains that kind of resolution. Maybe even better than that in some cases. I get a lot of my images from an observatory run in the Southern Hemisphere with a 24-inch CDK and one of these new 9,000 by 6,000 pixel, small pixel telescopes, and bin 2 by 2. And I can get on some of those images a trail that it's a curved, it's a sloping trail. It's dark in the middle and goes towards bright on the outside. And you can see its width till it gets to background is about 5 pixels, but you can see each level of that decline. So I don't know what kind of resolution that is. I haven't found any way to judge it. Let's see what else. I think on this page, that's the principal ones. Visual perception, as the number and size of the cones and rods in our eyes differ. Rods for the color receptors are larger and much more sparse, and not even located in the same place as the cones. The cones cluster toward the center of our vision, and the rods are more peripheral. And our brain interprets these colors. If you've ever seen our brain interpret red, blue, and green, the difference between the red and the blue, if you lay it out on a spectrum, like a filter, a spectrum showing filters, the red and blue are almost identical. And the brain is the thing that interprets whether it's red or blue. And it's not always reliably either, I'll say. Okay. What is a luminance image? We capture luminance images, and at the pixel level, what it is, its brightness is all we're measuring. Some measure usually dictated between 0 and 1, or if we have 16-bit, then it's one of the bits available over a span of 2 to the 16th. It has no color information, obviously. It's a grayscale image. And in color theory, the word lightness is used for perceptual brightness. That is what we see as bright and dark and gray and everything in between. Whereas luminance is a photometric measurement, something done by an instrument and highly repeatable. But we generally use those two terms interchangeably, and I'll be pretty sloppy with them throughout this talk. They mean the same thing to me. That is the apparent brightness, so it's the lightness of a pixel, for instance. Okay, lightness is actually in a color space called CIE L star A star B star, or CIE lab, or just the lab color space. These are 3 axes, L, A, and B, and there are 3 axes if you want. They're just like the axes, or similar to the axes in a cylindrical coordinate system. We also have RGB coordinates, and those might be like the XYZ coordinates that we're used to. So they're just different coordinate systems. Every color that is in an RGB space can be expressed as a color in lab space, but the vice versa, the inverse of that is not true, in fact. But nonetheless, there we have it. Okay, so when we insert L into a color image, what we have to do is we take that color image and we convert it to some other color space, like CIE lab or lab color space. Then we take out the L that was in the image and we put in our new L, and then we convert it back into RGB color space. That's what we actually do. And there's a lot of nonlinear mathematics involved in doing something like that. It's not just, R plus 10% G equals L and something like that. It's a nonlinear set of equations. So when we go in and out, we may not come back, even if we go in and out with something that's fairly new, we may change the colors in the RGB color space. Almost always, we will tend to dilute those colors, make them paler by adding more luminous color, brightness to the image, and degrade the saturation of the RGB image by putting L in through this method. I believe now, from what I've read, I don't use Photoshop, but from what I read, I think they try to compensate automatically for that and recover the saturation you had. Where in PixInsight, the tool that puts that L into your RGB image has sliders at the bottom where you can adjust the saturation of the image that comes out. I mean, kind of a trial and error method. But nonetheless, it's actually possible that you can put an L into an RGB image and have an image where the greens are now bluer than they used to be. And it's not a saturation issue, it's actually a color shift. That's one disadvantage of using L. It's not a great one unless you're doing science, because who cares what the colors really are? If you look at a Hubble color image, those colors mean nothing to our eyes other than a way to discriminate H from HSO. Okay, but the point of it is RGB has no L layer, just the RGB layers. And so people mix that up a lot too and speak of it as if it's in there. Now, I want to go on to why we don't need luminance. And the first reason we don't need it, here's some chroma LRGB filters. You can tell the B, the blue, the green, and the red filters where they are very obviously. Here's their L filter. Can you see it here? It starts here. It's this blue. It goes up, goes across this bridge, over and down right on that leg. And so if you're using chroma filters or any filters, in fact, this is either very good truth or not a bad approximation to truth, that R plus G plus B equals L. And if you've ever made a super L image, you know that because you take the L you captured and you add the RGB. And if you do it right, you add RGB divided by 3. But in any case, the point of it is if a photon comes in here and a certain wavelength, it will be captured by one of these 3 filters, given the efficiency of the camera, and it would also be captured by the L. So there are no photons that get into the camera that are only admissible to an L filter and that cannot be captured otherwise. By the way, if you're looking at nebulae, then virtually all your light is coming in here in red and in here somewhere in between blue and green. And so the width of these filters and whether they overlap or don't overlap really isn't of that great a concern. Besides, if you have a green filter in here and there's a photon that comes in right here between the blue and the green filters, it'll be captured by the green filter, but it's not going to be doubled because you don't have the blue filter in there, so it can't see that same photon. So there's no duplication. This is a pretty good equation. Okay. Let's see, the only difference, the important difference between R, G, and B filters is that, for instance, an R filter tells you that the photon had a wavelength something in this range, and green tells you that it was in this range, and blue tells you that it's in this range, and L tells you, well, I don't know that kind of detail. All I know is it was in the visible. And so there's less information, it's color information, but less information in an L subframe than in an RGB, which immediately makes you think maybe I should capture more RGB and toss out the L since this contains less information. And that's true. Okay, another thing you should be aware of is this is a PixInsight tool, and it's called RGB working space, and maybe some of you have seen it and maybe some of you haven't. It's not very well advertised, and it's important because what it does is when you put L into an image or when you extract L from an image, it tells how to weight the R, the G, and the B. These weightings, which are the default in PixInsight and the default in Photoshop, I think it can be changed in Photoshop too, but I don't know how. These are the weightings. So if you have an L image, 71.6% or 7% of that signal is given to the green channel, 22% to the red, and only 6% to the blue. And if you wanted to extract L, it would say, how much green do you have? I'm going to weight that at 71% of the L. Well, if you know about our objects we look at out there, green is the least common of these 3, and yet it's receiving the most weight. Now, Juan of PixInsight wrote an article, I don't know what now, 15 years ago, about changing these. And his conclusion was, these are my defaults. I put them in there. Every time you open up PixInsight, those are what you get. Don't use them. Change it to a uniform. You know, put in 111 and normalize it. Or he says, put in heavy weight to red, big weight to blue, and very little weight to green, and use that while you're doing your image processing. That's a side light. Okay. As I said, the better your signal to noise ratio, the better you will see fine scale structure. And you can do that supposedly in two different ways. One is increasing the signal and the other is decreasing the noise. So historically, what we did was decrease the noise, and there are two ways to do that. One way was to apply algorithms that smooth out the image, and they therefore average the noisy pixels with the pixels around them. It's basically a low-pass filter, and I don't offhand, I thought about it for a little while, know of any PixInsight tool that doesn't use this method of diminishing the noise. It's a smoothing operation. The only problem, and there's some that do it better than others. There are ones that are more clever about the way they do it, but they all do that. And the problem with it is it's also smoothing or blurring not only the noise, but it's also blurring the signal. So it's not an ideal technique, but it was the only technique we had to a few years ago. Another way to decrease the noise historically is to capture more images and average them together, which we do in the stacking. That more images you could catch would be, for instance, more R, G, and B images. As we capture more and more, there's a 1/√² law for decreasing the noise, where n, if you double n, means you decrease the noise by 1/√2. And n is the number of subframes you capture. Okay, now, in principle, that's the reason why people began capturing luminance images. You can capture luminance images much more quickly to reduce noise, to reduce luminance noise, and only luminance noise. Then you can capture individual R, G, and B frames. So that was a quick way of reducing noise to some degree, is capture the luminance. And if you capture more luminance and you suppress the noise, you get more signal. And I think this is where the misinterpretation came in. I see more detail now, so obviously luminance carries the detail. No, it suppresses the noise. The signal is there. Okay, so looking at this quantitatively, so say we had 4 hours of each, 4 of R, G, and 4 B as well, and we had 4 hours of L. This is very common. People will get about the same L that they have RGB. They then substitute that L into the RGB image. Okay, if we have 4 hours each of this, we add R plus G plus B, we get 12, and we divide by 3, we get 4. So the amount of L that, or noise reduction, that was already in the RGB images was equal to 4 hours of L. So if we did this thing here of dropping in the L, which would remove the old L, then we would make no decrease in noise in the image. If, on the other hand, we put in 4 hours, we have 4 hours of RGB and 8 hours of L, then putting the L into the image would reduce the noise by 1/√2, which means we reduce the noise by 30%. And this would probably make more structures visible above the level of the noise. But in fact, no or very little fine scale structure has been introduced. All we've done is decrease the noise. Okay, here's a little graph I made up. Here's the factor of numbers of subs. So this says you've taken 10 times as many subs as R plus G plus B divided by 3 subs, 20 times as many, 30 times as many, and here's what your noise reduction is. So to get a noise reduction down to, this is actually 12.5% of the original noise is left in it, you need 30 times as many luminance subs as you have equivalent luminosity in the RGB. That's a lot. So times have changed, and CMOS sensors have much lower read noise, for instance, than do CCD images. Excuse me. A CCD read noise is divided by CMOS read noise is about 8. It's been reduced by about a factor of 8 in these modern cameras. So that means that you've removed that 87.5% of the noise by simply switching from a CD camera to a CMOS camera. That's equivalent. Let's say we had 90-second subs and we have 15 in each color. That means we would have to take 450 luminance subs with our CMOS camera, a CCD camera. That's 11 hours to get the same noise level that we have by taking no L's with a CMOS camera. That's a hint about what taking L's will do with the CMOS camera. And that's means not very much. So pretty much CCDs are passé, and collecting large number of subs as the only way to reduce noise is gone, because there's a simple way. It does require a financial outlay, but there you go. That makes L pretty much arcane to begin with. But there's more technology. It's not only that, we now have AI noise reduction. And here's some of the tools you may be familiar with. Noise Exterminator, which is a for sale tool. I don't remember, $60, $70. Does an excellent job. Topaz Denoise AI, even better job. Deep SNR, not quite as good as the other two, but free and comes with, I believe now embedded into PixInsight. Okay. When you use these AI tools, they reduce all kinds of luminance noise, shot noise, read noise, what have you, but they don't do color noise. You need a different method for color noise, and almost all of those are still averaging methods. I haven't been able to convince anybody they need to do that yet. Color noise is not as big a deal in most of our images anyway. So now most imagers that actually apply some AI noise tool as part of their imaging process. And in my experience, AI noise reduction alone is more efficient than capturing a large number of subs. So even if you have a CCD camera, stop capturing the subs. Make sure you have enough RGB that you don't have a lot of color noise, and then apply AI noise reduction to your image and forget about the L. It will do, the AI noise reduction will do far more than the L will. Okay, so in case you don't believe me at this point, I'm going to move to a quantitative study that I did a little while back. And it's going to compare the perceptive structures, fine scale structures in two images. And it does this by a method that I found on the internet. And it requires a little bit of programming on my part to bring it to fruition, but I got there eventually. Okay. Let's see. So the previews of what I'm going to find in this study so that you can follow along is that the RGB separate subs with no luminance added are adequate, and there's no no significant luminance doesn't add anything significant to a color image. And as a spin-off, I'll talk a little bit about how L image with 14 hours compared to an L image of 4 hours and one with even less than 4 hours. The content, fine scale structure of their content is equivalent. And these are comparing L luminance grayscale images. And so that would say that if you're going to drop one of these into an RGB image, don't take the 14-hour one, don't take the 4-hour one. In fact, take the 1.5-hour one that I also studied and put it in, and it will probably degrade the content, in fact, of your image, which probably has more than that already in it, hidden in the RGB, encoded in the RGB. Okay, the method that I'm going to use, all this is done, most of this first part is done in PixInsight, and the subs are calibrated and stacked, and I use WBPP for my calibrations. The calibrations are only calibrations. It doesn't do anything beyond calibration. No stacking in the WBPP and nothing else. This is all done separately. The screen stretch, I keep it as simple as possible. The screen transfer function through a histogram transform stretches the images. Sometimes I adjusted the black point a little bit if there was some room to do that. And stars and noise were removed when they were in the images, which was using star exterminator and or noise exterminator. Really doesn't matter in these images. They came out about the same regardless of what I used, or even if I used both of them, which is really overkill. Some images were then enhanced using simple HDR wavelets, very reproducible, transforms, so that if you apply the same wavelet transform to 2 images, you get the same effect on those 2 images. And then occasionally, just for demonstration, I did some additional processing. Okay, the histograms of the image were something called histogram matched. And that's vital because 2 images have to have the histogram if you're going to see differences in their structures inside them when you're blinking them. Or using one of these other methods, I did a pixel math equation where you take image A, subtract image B, and add a half. If A and B are identical, then you're going to have a uniform gray image at a brightness of 0.5. And then perceptual fine scale structure was quantitatively compared using a method developed by a man named Yang and his group. And it's hard to explain, and I won't do it. I will leave in here a reference to his articles. And he also wrote a book, which he wrote after I did my study. And he had a new and better way of doing it, which I didn't use in this study. But nonetheless, what it does is it tries to look for these perceptual changes in fine scale structures, or in any scale structure between 2 images. I was only interested in the fine scale. Got to grab a glass of water here. Here we go. Okay. So first of all, what is histogram matching? And I'm not going to read this to you this time, but it matches the histograms of the 2 images you want to compare so that their features are in the same place, and that will make them as close as possible to the same values. Where it's not possible is where the images are different. It's not possible to make the histograms the same. It's basically a complex curve transform. Once it's done, A and B can be compared by whatever method you choose to do. Here's an example of what histogram transform does. Here's the histogram of an image. I call it the target image. It's the one I want to transform. I want to transform its histogram. They're the same objects, but taken with 2 different cameras and 2 different nights and all this kind of stuff. So their histograms are not the same. But I want to take this histogram and be able to compare this image to this image. So I want to make this histogram look like this one. When I run it through a histogram matching program, which I also had to write, this is what comes out. So you can compare this one to here, and you can see that the peaks are pretty much the same. There are some mismatches, and some of those mismatches are because the histograms aren't binned. All our data are bin data. You know, if you have 8-bit data, then you have 2 to the 8th possible bins. If you have 16 to the 16 possible bins, minus 1, I guess. No, to the 16. Okay, but anyway, once these are made the same, then I can compare those two images quantitatively. Here's the first quantitative comparison. This is a blinked comparison. When I say captured down here and extracted, captured means it's L that was captured as L subframes. Extracted means it's the L that was pulled out of the RGB image by transforming it into the lab coordinate system and taking that L out of the lab coordinate system and comparing them. They're blinking, and so these are almost the same amount of exposure time, 3 hours and 4 hours. And there's not a whole lot of difference that you're going to see in between those two images. So that the L, if you replace the L in the image, the L extracted with the L captured, the image wouldn't change very much. Hardly at all. And over here, for your information, is what I did to the images before comparing them. That's the blinking. Here's next image. This is one where I used a quantitative method. And so this is captured and enhanced, and captured and extracted and enhanced. So this image has been enhanced by wavelets, enhanced clarity, dehaze, and what have you. A few things done in Topaz AI. Again, the images are being compared, but this time I have some quantitative scores to present. A high score means that they compare very favorably. A low score means that there's very little comparison. The scores run between 0 and 1, with 0 being no similarity and 1 being perfectly similar. A value usually around 0.8 or above is considered perfect, near perfect match, something that in general the difference your eye will not perceive. Now, what are these levels? To do this, I took the images apart in the following way. I took the image at full resolution and subtracted from it the image at half resolution. I did that for both of the images, the 3-hour and 4-hour image, and compared those. Then I took the one from half to a quarter and a quarter to an eighth and so on, and compared them. So that gives you the difference in detail at different scales within the image. So there's a difference in the finest level scale, the full scale to half scale, and it's a small difference by the standards of experienced users with this technique. All the others have insignificant difference, probably not statistically significant. I would say that those two in this quantitative measure are virtually identical images. Further on with that, I have two images here. First image has little squares on it, which you can see before they blink away. And those are the areas that contributed to lowering the score in the last image. Those are the areas where the images are more, less than 85, less than 0.85 match. There aren't that many images And they aren't in the areas that have the most detail. They're in dark areas that have very little detail. It ends up that this technique is kind of proportional. Its sensitivity is inversely proportional to the brightness of the image. It's very good at identifying differences in dark areas that are insignificant, where in bright areas, those insignificant differences are registered as insignificant. It was not really developed to handle dark areas, the method. So that's why, but here you can see that when you're into the lighter color area, lighter tone areas, that there aren't very many squares. It's not very much found in those areas. The second image here is a map of the whole image, where white means perfect match and black means perfectly unmatched. Gray is something in between, and you can see there aren't any black areas in there. All the matches are pretty high quality across the whole image.
Excuse me, Alex, can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Yeah. All right. So what we were just looking at was a nebula, right?
Correct.
And so was that done in broadband or narrowband?
This is a broadband RGB nebula. Okay, and that it was imaged in RGB and L. And there are two sources for the L. Then the L that we captured is luminance subs, and the L we got by converting the RGB image into a different color space and capturing the L
Okay.
of that color
Right.
space.
Okay.
So that's the two L's that are being compared. The one that already inherent in the RGB and separately captured. Here's a galaxy just for difference. And here's that map again of the differences between the two images. Oh, this is a difference image. So this is the L captured minus L extracted plus 0.5. So the image is more or less uniform, the gray at 0.5, showing that there are no real major differences between those images to the human eye, between the L captured and the L extracted. And here the difference, the L extracted is only equivalent to 1.5 hours, 1.4 hours, but the L captured is 5 hours. So this is a substitution somebody might be tempted to make. I captured 5 hours of that, where I captured only 1.5 hours of R, 1.5 of G, 1.5 of B. So I'm going to put that 5 hours in. Well, here's the difference. You're taking that L extracted, the one in the RGB, and you put it in this one instead. And there's the improvement in the image. Okay, I also made a map, a difference map of that one. And once again, the black areas in the image where the background sky is, show more differences where the galaxy is. The detail in the two differently obtained L values is virtually zero. The detail hasn't changed in the galaxy. So the next question one might ask is how much L is enough? And I did not pursue this one very hard, but I'll show you some preliminary results. Here's 4 hours of L versus 18 hours of L. Sorry, 14 hours. 4 versus 14 hours of L. And here are the similarity scores for the extracted L and the captured L. They're all basically a perfect match within the levels I measured. Now you can see some differences. If you look in, it's hard to point to, look in this area right here, you can see there's a difference in the tone of those two areas when they're blinked. And that's a very large area. And that tonal difference is probably because the histograms could not be matched perfectly. Overall, at all levels, the overall score of the similarity is 0.986. So that's extraordinarily high. Here's that map. And the only places you see mismatches are in the blacks here. And in this very bright area, let me go. this bright area down here, there are mismatches. And that's probably because the green amount of L, the 14 hours of L, that 14 hours of L that was captured separately probably saturated that area. And so it lost the detail. And that's probably why that happened. Okay, my overall conclusions, so we can be done with this, is augmenting an RGB image with separately captured luminosity provides little to no signal and noise enhancement to the RGB image. If modern AI denoising is applied to the RGB image and adequate RGB has been captured so that you don't have a whole lot of noise, color noise, or what have you from some other source of inadequate capture, which would also not be removed, by the way, even if you put the L into it. Replacing CCD sensors with CMOS sensors strengthens the conclusion above, and in fact, almost made, in my opinion, AI denoising obsolete, because it can remove virtually all the noise in one pass, with or without, whether it was CCD or CMOS cameras. By the way, all the examples I showed above were CMOS cameras. Thanks. Any questions, any comments, any complaints?
Well, this is music to my ear. I hate doing broadband stuff, and so not having to do luminance just makes my life a little bit easier. I'm mainly a narrowband guy, and so I never really did understand from a spectral standpoint when I looked at the bandpass filters for the red, green, and blue and the luminance. I never could understand from a spectral standpoint what luminance was adding to the image. And of course, the way folks got around it is they collected the RGB at 2x2 binning and luminance at 1x1, and oh wow, luminance adds more detail. Well, duh.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Another thing that's been bothering me in the last couple of weeks is, so you put a red filter on. That red filter captures photons over quite a bit of the visual spectrum. You then assign a single color to that, the red pixel in your display. And that is the wavelength that all of that is collapsed into. You're not getting all that information about the different parts of the red by taking a red image. Narrow band, at least you know what you're capturing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I'll throw a little story. Do we have time for that? A 3-minute story?
Oh yeah, no.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. I get a lot of my images from a man named Martin Poe. He sells raw subs from his 24-inch in Chile. He got a hold of my stuff somewhere or another and wrote to me and said, "Can you explain this to me, what I just talked about now?" So we had a Zoom meeting, and he says, "Okay, let me play with it a bit." And then he wrote back to me and says, "Okay, I'm convinced you're right. You don't need L." He says, "Now what do I do?" Because he's selling these images to everyone. He says, "I can't tell the people that I'm not going to give them L anymore." He says, "I'll have a fit and they'll cancel their subscriptions." Yeah, but he says, "But I'm convinced." And so what I do when he sends me these things, I'm paying for the damn L and I don't want it. But nonetheless, I take it. And here's what I do with it. I developed a method to insert the L into a linear image, so it doesn't distort the colors at all. Now I can live with it. And it does decrease the noise, the starting RGB stretched image. It doesn't do anything in the end, but at least now I feel like I'm using the images I paid for.
Mhm.
So that's about it.
Alex, you had a slide up of the one of the PixInsight tools that I'd like to learn a little bit more about, the RGB space.
Is that it?
Yeah, that one right there. Is that RGB working space? Is that only for if you've got a color image that you formed with the LRGB?
As you know, I have read and read and read, and it's not a lot of reading because there's very little about what the heck this is doing out there.
Yeah.
Uh, as far as I can tell, that's true. Only if you're manipulating in other color spaces that require a mapping of those things. Now, I know it's true if you map into anything that has an L, and there are multiple color spaces that have L's. In fact, there's must be now 12, 15 different color spaces in use. But as far as I can see, no, it's absolutely comes into play when you're mapping to a color space that has L to or from. Other color spaces, I'm not as sure.
Right.
And I don't know. I went into PixInsight and I searched for explanations of it, and the explanations never explain that kind of thing. All I can say is what Juan, what is his name, Kanahiro, said is you should change that.
Yeah, yeah, I've been using this blindly because I saw it in an Adam Block video,
Yeah.
and in another textbook on processing of PixInsight, processing in PixInsight. And it says before you can use I use ArcSign stretch
Yeah, right.
just to set my black background.
Yeah.
And this tool is a prerequisite to using the ArcSign stretch. And
Yeah.
it says go into this tool and set the R, G, and B all back to 1.
Yeah.
And then apply it to your image and then go into the arc stretch. But I've always just been mystified of what it's actually doing, and does it even apply to a narrowband, just pure RGB image?
Well, once you've converted once you've converted into RGB, which is what you do with the narrow band,
Right.
then you're processing in RGB. If you don't use that L, I don't know the answer. I've searched and searched and searched. The
Okay.
problem with it is, in my opinion, is this RGB working space. That's a word that Juan made up, and I don't know what word other people use, what other things use. I saw somewhere a claim that you can change that in Photoshop, which you should also do, because when you add luminance to an image in Photoshop, if you use luminance blending, apparently there's something called luminance blending. I didn't know that either. When you use luminance blending, it does what PixInsight does. It transfers you to a different color space, and then does this blending, whatever it's doing, and then transfers you back again. And so it's doing this RGB working space thing. And so, but they don't call it that probably, and I don't know where to set it in Photoshop. I don't use Photoshop, so it doesn't really bother me. But it bothers me that I can't find a discussion of this darn thing. All I ever find is these are the coefficients you should use because these reflect the sensitivity of your eye, beginning and end of it.
So is there anybody else who's on tonight use this RGB workspace in their PixInsight processing?
No,
No? Okay. Am I the only one that uses arc stretch to set the black background? Anybody else do that? Huh.
I use ArcSign all the time.
Yeah.
Not every image takes to it very well. What I do is I use ArcStretch to make sure that everything has good colors, particularly the stars. And
Mm.
so I'll do part of the stretch, the first part of the stretch in
Mhm.
arcsine stretch, and then I'll go to some other tool, usually mass stretch.
Yeah, I actually don't use the stretch part of it. I use, it has a really nice aspect to you can click on it and have it estimate your black background.
Yeah, right.
And then you can use a slider to really nicely set your black background.
Yeah,
And then that really helps and eliminates any offsets in your histogram transformation.
yeah, right.
And so that's why I use it, and it seems to be very successful. But I've always been curious on am I just, using this RGB space, setting things to one as just an academic exercise, then it probably is already a one.
No, it's not.
It's not. Oh, okay. All right. All right. So, all right. Well, then I will continue to follow the Mystique workflow that I have right now. Then.
Yeah, I have, when I do my PixInsight processing, I have a template, and all the icons, or most of the icons I use come up automatically. And the one next to title is RGB workspace.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I have all my icons, process icons, in the order that I in the workflow that I use them, and this RGB workspace is just right before the ArcSign process.
Yeah.
So, right. Well, you convinced me, Alex.
Well, we're now up to a two. No.
Alex, do you want to unshare your screen, and that
Oh,
way
yes, absolutely.
people will pop back up again?
Okay.
There we go. Alex, one of the things that I recall from one of your other presentations, and I think you touched on it briefly, and I may say this wrong or inarticulately, but it's kind of like when you're capturing luminance, you don't know if that photon is red, green, or blue. It's just going to be captured.
Yeah.
And then when you go to apply luminance, let's say you're looking at an object that, miraculously is all blue. It's not going to put that in the blue bucket. It's going to spread it across RGB according to the formula we were just looking at.
Yes.
And was that kind of your point, that you kind of get, I don't want to say false colors or pale colors, but you're kind of affecting the RGB data that you have in a way that maybe you never intended?
Yeah, that happens. I have other
Hmm.
slides, which I can't get too quickly, that show that if you there are cases where you add L to an image and the color of the areas shift when you do that. They don't stay true to their colors, like the red may go toward orange and things like that. The problem where this occurs is the transformations around these color spaces aren't all linear. Many of them are nonlinear. And furthermore, in some of the color spaces like LAB color space, L runs from 0 to infinity. But in our RGB, it runs from 0 to 1. So you can get in trouble if L is greater than 1 in the lab color space. You're getting back into the RGB color space. You will get back in. They force it back in, and it's not going to give you the same color as you should have, as you expected. So I spend hours and hours and hours reading color theory books, and I guess I just didn't have the undergraduate training in biology to handle their discussions. But I think the idea has sunk into my head that L is a dangerous thing if you don't know what you're doing.
Mhm.
You know, the one thing I noticed when you were blinking those objects is, to my personal biological eyes, the RGB with its, embedded luminance
Yeah.
looked like it had better detail than multiple hours of just pure luminance. And I'm using a pretty good monitor right now, but probably the weakest part is my eyeballs.
Yeah, I don't see that with my eyes, but well, as I said, we're all different in that regard.
Mhm.
You know, you spend all your time calibrating your monitor and doing all these wonderful things, and I think Juan again said that after you get done with the images and you have all the colors and everything just the way you want it, and you post it on the internet, between 5 and 10% of the people will see it the way you intended.
Hmm.
Right. Mike, did you have a question to?
No question, but I agree that when I take RGB and then I add luminance, because say if an object is mostly blue and you add luminance, then you're making the whole thing white, which has red and green, and then you're shifting the colors all over the place. You're losing a lot of the blue, but you're adding in other colors on top of it. And then you have, when you process it later, then you're trying to get back the blue that is supposed to be there.
Mhm.
So yeah, it makes sense to us. RGB is uh, amount of color and everything. Otherwise, your colors are washed out. Especially, they had the RGB and 404 or worse skies. But then the luminance, you tend to blow out the histogram if you go very long. Versus RGB, you can take a lot longer images. You get a lot longer exposures with them.
Mhm. Well, this is going to be a real time saver for me. I mean, um, my protocol in the past up until tonight was I was always taking. So if I took RGB and I did 25 subs of R, G, and B, I would automatically do 50 luminance subs, and
Yeah,
just twice as many as the most of the RGB, and now I'm thinking that was a real waste of a lot of valuable time.
So that begs the question, Dennis and Alex, is rather than, assuming that it's 1 minute subs, I know they're not. So you have 75 minutes of RGB. Should you be, if you're not going to collect luminance, would you collect 100 or 125 or 150? Or would you just stick with the 25, again, my example, 25 1 minute subs?
I think the thing is, it's going to depend on your seeing conditions when you peak out.
Mhm.
If you're sitting on one of these great mountains somewhere or another, and you only want to take 2 hours of RGB, you may not have reached the limit of what you can get. But if you're in downtown Los Angeles, you probably don't need 2 hours to reach your limit.
Yeah, I got to remember, Kevin, back in Glover's presentation,
Yes.
about the limiting factor is in what's going to really determine how long your subs are going to be, is in fact the light pollution.
Yeah, and I wasn't talking, I wasn't talking about the length of the subs. I was talking about the number of subs.
Well, yeah,
So rather than taking 75 or whatever minutes and then 50, do you say, I'm just going to take 100 of each?
Yeah, I think I showed you guys the slide that I showed my students about mapping number of subs versus signal to noise improvement comes down dramatically fast after about the first 25, and then it flattens out. And so you can judge for yourself that how much extra time you want to do to pick up very, very subtle improvement in your signal to noise. That's why I kind of joke. I hear these people, say, "Oh, this was a real definite. Oh, I did the squid and I did 500 subs."
Yeah.
And it's silly because the amount of improvement between like 100 subs and 500 would probably not be perceivable.
There's also this new trend of getting a team and everybody taking pictures and putting them together from vastly different scopes of vastly different focal lengths and vastly different areas. Probably degrades the good part of the captures with the bad part, and you're averaging all of those together and ending it with an image that, yes, has 300 hours of exposure, but is less than one person got, the best person got from their best area.
Right. Yep.
I'll just show one thing more, if you don't mind a quick share here. It's an image I processed today. Okay, there's, and this one is, let's see if I can get it up to where it belongs. Kind of confused with all the things on my screen. There it is. This is a RGB only. It came from Martin Poe, who I talked about a little while ago, and his 24-inch, and it came with a buttload of L, and I threw out the L and just used the RGB, and I think it did pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, very nice. Oh, cow.
Yeah. So clearly RGB has some information in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only problem with your images, Alex, I see them, I think, boy, that's really neat. Then I realize you've taken it from Chile.
Yeah. At one point I actually had a friend who works for CDK, Planewave, and he said, "Why don't we put a telescope in Chile?" And then we started calculating the cost of putting a 14-inch down there, and it became, I could do that, or I could dine at fine restaurants for the rest of my life.
Any other questions for Alex?
This isn't related to your talk, but this is kind of a funny topic that we occasionally bring up at this group. We've got a group of folks that if they're doing narrowband imaging, they will do their their hydrogen, sulfur, and oxygen and get their beautiful narrowband imaging. But then what they'll do is they'll remove the stars, and then they'll do just the regular broadband RGB, and then put the RGB stars back in. And my question to them is okay, are you doing all of that to just gratify yourself that the star colors are right, but isn't the dominant image a pseudo color image anyway? I mean, the nebulosity, which occupies, like, I just did the rosette behind me here, and they're to go through all of that work for those few peripheral stars, and ironically, who's going to know? When I look at my images and I don't do that extra RGB processing of stars, I get a nice selection of white stars and blue stars and red stars and yellow stars. I mean, I get a nice mix of stars, and to me as an astronomer, I know there's that variety of star colors out there. I'm satisfied. And but I just don't understand the extra effort to take a pseudo image and add true color stars to it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it's odd to do that. I do binaural band. I do true color mapping. So, they go into the colors, the true colors. So, sulfur is far red, hydrogen is red with a little green, and oxygen is teal. And then I put those together, make an RGB image, and I can color calibrate it then. And the stars come out correct. And the image has more or less the correct things. But I think we get confused sometimes and think at times we're doing science and at other times we're doing art. And I think your example is where the two have gotten confused.
right.
We're doing science with the stars and art with the nebula. And I very, very, very seldom ever think that I'm doing science. Everything I do is art, but I want it to be the kind of art I want.
Well, since I start, I'm sorry, Carol, just make a quick point. And ever since I started using SPCC, the new spectral color calibration, using the Gaia database for both the position and the spectral information, I've seen a tremendous improvement in the variety and the content of my star colors. And it's obviously related to me using that tool, because I compare images prior to using SPCC, and I don't have nearly the distribution of star colors. So I don't know. I'm sorry, Carol. Yeah.
I'm coming at this from a different aspect. I think I use a one-shot color camera, and I'll shoot a lot of things with a dual narrowband filter. Well, my stars are crappy looking, color-wise. And I've always thought that I should be taking some broadband to put some nice star colors back in. Is there a way is there a workaround I can do without adding the broadband stars?
Well, Carol, you're saying you're using a color camera, right? So you're essentially already have built into your camera all the broadband filters.
But when I do the narrowband, I lose that.
So you're putting a narrowband filter in front of a RGB camera, or color camera?
Yes. The Altair, the dual narrowband for HA03.
Yeah, it has bypasses both the oxygen and the hydrogen, but takes out everything in between.
Yeah, at 5 nanometers.
Yeah.
But I haven't figured out how to, I can do, I can extract HA and I can extract O3 and I can work with them, but I have never gotten good star color. It's just gone. And that's where I'm thinking I need to be adding the broadband star color back in and spending all that time on broadband star color. It actually probably wouldn't take much time at all to get some decent stars. Am I missing something? Nobody shoots in color here.
In theory,
Yeah.
in theory, you could take the debayer, get the red, green, and blue from that, and then put those back into, it sounds like it's a circular thing though. You go back into red, blue, and green, and then color calibrate, and it should be able to bend those back toward true star colors. It depends a little bit on the filters, how much green they get, how far into the green, because some of them I've seen, I believe, for the oxygen, only capture the blue side of the oxygen. I don't really pick up very much of the teal
Right.
part of it. And so it depends how where those filters are. But you should have, if you debayer it, you should be able to see a signal for the stars in both the red, the blue, and the green. And if you see a signal for all three of those, then you should be able to color balance it. I'm not sure what the steps would be, but it should color balance. You know, maybe you need to do something. Maybe you need to take the red, blue, and green out of there, separate them, and then you use PixInsight.
No.
Oh, too bad. Because I was going to say, and then you use linear fit, and you would linear fit the three, and then you would have something that was rudimentarily, whatever the word is, color balanced, and then you could do photometric color calibration. But you need to get the photometric color calibration in there at least. And so if you have a tool that does photometric color calibration,
possibly. I know there's a star color calibration. I mean, I can check on them with Astro Pixel processor, and they can use different terminology, so I'd have to check into it.
Yeah, but that if you use that, it should get you back star colors.
Okay, thanks. See, I have to take everything you say and then translate it to a different language to apply it to my processing.
Well, I think you're actually on the cutting edge. I wouldn't be surprised at all if most of us end up with one-shot color cameras as techniques improve for using those, and especially with the small.
Yeah, I'm seeing more people move back over to them.
Well, the very small pixel sizes are a boon to one-shot color, because combining things, you know, you lose resolution in one-shot color. About almost a factor of 2 binning kind of thing. But if you have pixels that are down at 3 microns, who cares?
Any other questions?
Yeah, that was very good, Alex. I really enjoyed the presentation tonight.
Well, I'm open to questions anytime. I'll send my email to the gang.
Oh, good.
And I can send the PowerPoint. I'll tell you what, you recorded that. I'll send the references that I have to things like the histogram matching and what have you. And if any of those I have, plus my email, and I'd be happy to communicate with people about any of this. I enjoy that.